So, Jenna, thank you for taking time out of your day to have a chat with us. We are talking about Faceless After Dark, which got its world premiere, I think, at Fright Fest in London at the end of August. How was that screening and what was the reaction like?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for talking to me. And yes, it was the world premiere at Fright Fest in London. It was amazing. It was, I mean, they had a screen on their main IMAX screen, which is over 50 feet tall. I don't know how to convert that to meters. I'm been painfully deprived of the metric system. But there was a crowd. It was packed. It was something like 730 seats. And people asked really insightful questions afterwards. People laughed and gasped and cheered, and it was incredibly interactive, which is all you can ask for. I mean, the biggest reward is getting to actually watch something that you've worked so hard on with an audience.
And Faceless After Dark explores toxic fandom and parasocial relationships, which are both, I think they're both kind of like relatively new concepts. What do you think that what do you think has changed in our society to facilitate these?
I definitely think that we've had forms of parasocial relationships for a long time, but they've certainly taken on a new level with the rise of social media and of obviously the internet and the way that we communicate, even with messaging and things like this, Zoom, FaceTime, and any sort of interaction that breaks down a seeming barrier between ourselves and the media that we consume. I do think that we've had a sense of it for a long time, but now it's just everyone seems so much more accessible to us. And at the same time, we kind of need to at least seem more accessible. It can help a lot for someone in my position and a lot of other artists, a lot of other filmmakers, actors, writers, even musicians, journalists. There's this level of needing to be accessible to your audience in order to generate a following and a fan base, because there's this sort of currency in followings, which, if you've seen the film, there's kind of a double entendre there to the concept of following and that idea. But I definitely think it's this idea of accessibility, which in a way is really beautiful because it allows us to connect with people in ways that we never have before and to feel communities that we perhaps had been deprived of in the past. But then obviously at the same time, it can breed a very unhealthy relationships with each other and with people that we feel as though we know, but perhaps don't.
Yeah, no, definitely, I completely agree. And as well as starring in the film, you also co-wrote it, and your character is an actor who was made famous for starring in a film with a killer clown, which obviously mirrors your own appearance in Terrifier. How much of your own life experience informed the script and the places that you went with this film?
I've never murdered anyone.
That's good.
We'll start there. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the easiest answer. Other than that, there are certainly a good number of aspects of the film that were plucked from my own life, some of which we really didn't have to change, and some of which we expanded upon and took some creative liberties with. I have had stalking scares. I have had a lot of, I'm sure you have too, as someone who's female presenting, had a lot of interactions online with people just voicing their opinions on my appearance that no one asked for. I've received a lot of unsolicited pictures of genitals, and some of the real ones I've received are actually hidden throughout the film. So, if you don't want people to see it, don't send it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of aspects of those sorts of things. But then there's also, I identify as queer. I've never hidden that or been asked to, but I know other actors who have, to create more marketability for themselves, to hide that aspect of themselves. And so things like that were certainly taken from real life, even if not necessarily my story. But I certainly draw from my own experience the feeling of surviving with mental illness while being barraged with notifications about tragedies all over the world. There's the messages I get all the time about how I looked better with longer hair, whatever, that's boring now, come up with something new. But then at the same time, there's, notifications about bombings and school shootings, and which obviously are unbelievably common in America, and there's really no need for them to be. There's lots that we could do about that and simply don't. But hearing about all of these tragedies in that way, that the way that we consume news now, where it's so constant, and not just news, but what our friends are doing, and everyone's sort of performative ideas of success online, and it feels like this sort of onslaught at times when you're already maybe not in the most stable place. And so I wanted to try to personify that, and then kind of sprinkle in some of the experiences that I've had. Most of the experiences I've had with fans, I'm fortunate to say, are wonderful. Most of them are so lovely. I never want anyone to watch this movie and think that I'm, dunking on the people who support me. Absolutely not. Most of them are amazing. But then there are a handful that's not the case, that things that I've had to deal with, that my co-star Catherine Corcoran, who's in Terrifier with me, who's in Faceless After Dark as well, she has to deal with those even more so because of how feminine presenting she is. And because she agreed to be nude in the film, she has to deal with a whole other level of people feeling entitled to personal space. And then obviously just, existing in a pervasive rape culture, there's lots of stuff I have to pull from there. Of, I am trained in martial arts, and there are times when I've had to use that or threatened to have to use that. And there are times, and I'm sure you've dealt with this too, where I've been followed, or where people don't want to hear the word no, or where people act inappropriate, or, put something in your drink. And all of that, unfortunately, comes from a real place. But I have not murdered anyone yet.
Yet. I mean, but the film, I guess, in a way is cathartic. It's almost like therapy in a way. It's giving you that opportunity, and for a lot of other female identifying people, that that release for, like you say, this is what we have to live with day in, day out. You can't do something as simple as go on public transport sometimes without somebody being inappropriate. So this film, I think, is a great cathartic. It's almost like that scene in Midsummer, where they're all like chanting together. It's like, this is an extension of that in some way. So I guess, that must be quite nice to know that, you have. I mean, I spoke to some of my friends at Fright Fest who were like, yes, let's smash the patriarchy. It must be nice to know that, that message, of sort of like unity within, the female identified community is getting out there.
Thank you. That's a high compliment. That's absolutely what I want people to feel. And even, people of the queer community, people of the gender non-conforming community, I mean, non-binary people. I'm not trans, but I want them to feel safe in this space too. I mean, there's, and even for people who are cis het, or for people who are men, or for people who are white, there's something to be. Everyone has had some experience that's made them uncomfortable, and if you haven't, maybe think if you're the person making people feel uncomfortable. Otherwise, because there is this sort of by putting ourselves out there, there's an entitlement that we have to be careful not to feel about each other's space and time. And the catharsis certainly was a goal, and something that myself and my co-writer Todd Jacobs actively set out to find, where we've seen so many films, and I love this genre of film, like Taxi Driver is a good example, I think, of a character who starts out as the protagonist, and you watch them become the antagonist, and it's a fun storyline to watch, and there is something cathartic about someone who just has nothing left to lose and is on this almost suicidal journey of just getting rid of whatever they have left. And we've seen that story a bunch of times in the form of, like I said, Taxi Driver, King of Comedy, and then a million different versions of the Joker, but we haven't really seen that in a female form. And when we do, it's very often surrounding, avenging a rape or being a mother. And obviously those are both very important things to deal with and talk about, and big parts of people's identities. But we wanted to try to tell a story that we hadn't seen before, or in a new way, at least.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously this is it's a horror, sort of like a meta horror thriller, and Terrifier is where most people will know you from. And recently you were part of Renfield, so I think throughout your career you've been quite drawn to horror. What is it about this genre that fascinates you?
Well, in some ways, horror chose me. I didn't necessarily set out and say, this is what I'm going to do. There was something about me that people just wanted to murder, I guess. But in all seriousness, I have always loved horror, even before I worked in the genre. I've always loved it because of that catharsis that you're talking about. I originally got into horror because when I was much younger, I had just a nightmare menstrual cycle where I would just be home in unbelievable amounts of pain, bleeding so much they thought I had an iron deficiency for several days every month because the pain was so bad. I'd be hopped up on all these painkillers. Both my parents worked full time. My brother was at school. And so I'd be left at home to watch movies and on the couch because I couldn't move. And horror was where I found the most catharsis, like we're talking about. It was very therapeutic, I kind of stumbled into it because it was just what was on TV, and I probably was too young to be watching some of that stuff. But, for 2 hours, I'm sitting here and I'm not worried about my own pain. I'm worried about, is she going to get out of this house? Is she going to defeat this killer? Is he going to make it to the end? There's kind of this displacement of our pain that I think that horror can address so uniquely in a way that a lot of other genres can't. And then at the same time, horror historically has been much more inclusive in a lot of ways than other genres, racially, sexually, in terms of gender performance, in terms of addressing issues in society that would feel very heavy-handed perhaps in another genre. You can be literally heavy-handed in horror, but it's a part of the fun and the camp of it all and the spectacle.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the horror has always been for like the she's, theys and gays.
Yes.
It's about celebrating, the other. I mean,
Yes.
I don't know about yourself, but I still find, I mean, I primarily write about horror. I still find a lot of gatekeeping sometimes from
Yeah.
certain groups of men. I guess,
Mhm.
as somebody who is working not only in front of the camera but behind the camera, is
Yeah.
that something that you yourself have experienced?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'll express gratitude for the fact that I have been given a lot of amazing opportunities and worked really hard for amazing opportunities. But then at the same time, there is a level of gatekeeping from men and sometimes from other women, which is the most heartbreaking. I mean, internalized misogyny is a thing. I'm never going to think that I'm a perfect feminist. I'm always working on it to decolonize my mind, because we all
Mm.
have implicit bias that we have to work on. And it's just a matter of how much you acknowledge that and how much you work on it. But, I mean, I've been an actor for uh, over a decade, a really long time. And I've been a stunt performer for a good chunk of that time. And then maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I started directing. And I've directed, I think, something like 17 short form projects at this point. Short films, fundraising videos, proof of concepts, music videos, things like that. And I've assistant directed features. I've produced features, like I helped produce Faceless. And I've come up against a lot of resistance when trying to direct a feature, which I've been trying to do for a really long time. And it does seem now with this project, there's another project that I'm working on that it seems like I'm about to be very, very close, but I do feel that I've had to prove myself much more than a lot of the men that I have found myself, that I used to find myself assistant directing for, which is one of the reasons that I stopped, was that I found myself assistant directing for people who were far less experienced than I was. And it was incredibly frustrating to clean up their messes and to not be given the same sort of opportunities. And I do think that is changing slowly. And obviously, non-white people, global majority of people face it even more so. But it's an ongoing uphill battle. But the idea is that we all have to, work together, because otherwise, there's seats at the table for everybody. And I have noticed, even within my own community in Atlanta in the past, there was a group of women even that were almost gatekeeping me to a degree. And we have to remember that there's seats at the table for everybody. It's not a matter of, something for you means less for me. That's just not how art works. And a rising tide lifts all ships, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar thing in the writing world, which is
For
why
sure. Yeah.
in the UK, Zoe Rose Smith created Ghouls magazine, which is for non-binary and female identifying writers as an outlet, because the amount of horror outlets that would be like, well, no, or we've already got one of
Right, we
you.
checked our box, thank you.
Yeah, we've already got one of you. So, and
Right.
what do you know that this man doesn't, this like really old like white
Right,
man doesn't, doesn't already know. So,
right,
it's nice that there are these spaces being created, and like
yeah.
Ghouls is very much like, women lifting up women.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then even worse sometimes when you're given an opportunity and then not set up to succeed. That's also something that I see happens where, an example is like when we see female directors finally get big budget opportunities in my field, for example, and if the movie doesn't do well, it's because she's a woman and she doesn't get another opportunity. Whereas, how many flops do men get to make and are still given opportunities? So I want to remind everybody that, the success of the Barbie movie is not because people like Barbies, it's because it's a good movie.
Yeah, yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
and especially in horror, I mean, I'm sure you've already read it, but the book Men, Women, and Chainsaws
Mm.
is unbelievable and talks about this, where there's kind of this weird sort of expectation that horror is for boys and men and leaves out over half of the population, which who also consume horror. I mean, and I'm guilty of this. I remember before I started doing convention appearances, and typically they're horror ones. I remember thinking, from a stereotypical place of what everyone who came to my table was going to look like. And I was very much surprised. I mean, and I continue to do them. I had one last weekend. I have one that I leave for tomorrow. And almost everyone who comes up to my table is marginalized in some way. A lot of people are not white, are disabled physically. A ton of people in that community are on the autism spectrum. Women, non-binary, queer, trans, like, and some of them sure are men as well. But I don't know, it's just like you said, a celebration of otherness, and it's a place to build community of otherness, and we have to remember that how vast our community is and how inclusive it is or can be.
I mean, you mentioned earlier, it's down to my questions that you've been doing stunts. What was it that made you want to get involved with the stunts, and what is it that you enjoy about it?
Sure. I got into them originally because my dad, who's a journalist, he's a writer as well. So much respect for what you guys do. It's very important and should be funded much better. He originally put me into martial arts when I was a kid, and I think as like an outlet because I had a lot of anger problems, but then also, to feel better about me leaving the house and defending myself. And then when I got older, I was still training in that way. And someone pointed out to me, those are stunts, because I had always thought stunts were jumping out of a building on fire. I had never
Yeah.
thought about stunts just being a fight scene or wielding a weapon or just falling down. And so then I rebranded myself as somebody who did my own, and I have been ever since. And they're some of my favorite things to do. I mean, action sequences make me so happy because there's something for me about dealing with depression and anxiety where when I'm performing an action sequence, I have to be present, because if you're thinking about the future, if you're thinking about the past, you're going to get hurt or you're going to hurt somebody else. And so I find it very, very thrilling, but also really grounding.
Yeah. I mean, do you have like a dream project that you'd like to be involved with? Because I know we're talking here about like your work in the horror genre, but there's plenty of like amazing, action films and
Oh
stories
yeah.
out there.
I mean, my two dream roles, one would be to be in some sort of high fantasy, that involves a lot of fighting and horseback riding and flying around. And I love flying through the air on a harness. And my other dream role would be when they completely unnecessarily remake Alien. I want to be Ripley.
I mean, I don't know if you can see behind me, but I've got an alien poster right there.
I love your entire background this wallpaper is iconic. Like everything that's going on here is great. We're just in front of my stupid audition setup. I have a beautiful like gallery wall of like flowers and stuff, but lighting is the best in front of my boring backdrop.
It's fine. As I said, like before we recorded, this is the first time that I'm doing it here.
It's
The
great.
wallpaper came with the house. The art we provided
Oh my gosh.
ourselves. Um,
Incredible.
but yeah, I mean, I mean, there is, you know, the Alien series and stuff. So, you know, I feel that it's tangible that, you know, I think
Thank you.
it could be a way in.
I did read for one of the prequels, so you never know.
Well, like, you know, let's start the campaign here. You know, let's get Jenna in a future Alien film. You know, we
Please.
can, you know, it
Well,
would. I
and on
mean,
the other side, I would say that there are a number of things that I want to direct that I'm really excited to. The one that I kind of alluded to earlier, there's a proof of concept that's an action comedy that I wrote and directed, and I'm also in, which will hopefully be coming out next year. And I'm going to try to use as a way to get the feature version of it made. And it does seem like there's some positive movement in that direction, which I'm really excited about. But then looking past that, there's a sci-fi that I really want to direct. And ultimately, one day, dream directing job, I would love to direct a high fantasy, but all of the characters are drag performers.
nice.
That would be dream directing role. We'll manifest all of it.
Yeah, like Dragula, but
Yes.
yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, you're just saying stuff that I'm like, yeah, I would watch.
Please. You heard it here first, folks.
And you know, your talents don't end with, you know, writing, directing, producing, stunt performing. Your IMDb also lists that you've got a special talent with training cats.
Oh yes, this is arguably my highest achievement. I will never accomplish anything as impressive as this. My cat, she is resting right now. She said she won't come out unless I negotiate her day rate. She's a diva, but I have trained her to high five, to turn in a little circle, to jump. She's gotten a little sick now, but when she was feeling better, she would play fetch. And I'm very proud of her. She comes to the door when I come home. She's the best.
I mean, how do you go about training a cat? Because like I can't even get mine to sit still during this interview, you know.
I know. I love that she isn't, though. I love that she's just insisting that we create space for her. I adopted my cat when she was a month old, and so I just started when she was really, really young. I know a lot of people use clicker training. I never did that. I used either just treats, positive reinforcement, or honestly just vocal and like petting positive reinforcement, because we're very codependent, and so sometimes praise is all she needs. And just repetition. I mean, with cats, you just gotta again and again over years.
But again, it opens up another option in the film industry of like animal handler, you know, animal trainer. If you can train a cat, you know, you can definitely train a dog. So
oh yeah, I mean, yeah, that's it. I mean, I respect those people so much, because that job is tough, because it's one thing to train her in the comfort of my home. To do it on set when there's an army of people around seems very daunting. I have so much respect for those people.
And sort of going back to Faceless After Dark, it next screens in the UK at Grimmfest in Manchester. Why should attendees take a chance on this film? Because obviously there's obviously the buzz out of Fright Fest for people that missed it there, but for those that haven't had a chance to do much reading or much exploring about this title, why should they take a chance on your film?
I think people should take a chance on Faceless After Dark because it's not what you expect it to be. I don't want anyone, you know, if anyone listening is excited about what we've been talking about in terms of inclusivity, then great, that's a reason to see it. If anyone thinks that doesn't interest them at all, then they should definitely see it, because I think it's still a lot of fun. It's still gory, it's still, you know, thrilling and exciting, and it takes a turn in the middle. You know, I would advise people to go in blind as possible, because it sets itself up as one thing and then it takes a turn. And I always think those are the films that are the most fun to watch, where it's always one step ahead of you.
Cool. Well, I wish you best of luck at Grimmfest.
Thank you.